Hey guys, thanks for checking out the final episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist, the podcast dedicated to all the weird and wonderful stories you are only going to hear about from reporters working in small communities just like yours. My name is Matt Shore, and I was one such reporter on a full-time basis for almost a decade before I finally hung up my camera and my notepad and became a family man. And in that time, I had some really unique and interesting experiences working with the public, and I got to know some other reporters who also had some really unique and interesting experiences. Now, before I go any further, I should take a step back and mention I might have led you on a little bit there when I say the final episode. What I mean by that is the final episode of 2019. Don't worry, we will be back next month, with a brand new episode, and as a matter of fact, that will be our official 1-year anniversary, which is pretty exciting. Been doing this for a full year. Can you believe it? And with that in mind, I have some pretty big announcements. So make sure you stick around at the end and see what those are. I'm gonna dangle that little carrot there and keep you guys hanging for a bit. Before I go any further, I do want to make sure and mention that this is a listener-supported podcast, supported by wonderful folks just like you. Here are some great ways that you can support us. One great way would be to visit my own website, www.mattshore.net. Go there, check out some of my books, and maybe even purchase one if you feel so inclined. You know, we've got comic books, we've got adult books, we've got young readers, we've got horror, we've got science fiction, we've got a little bit for everybody. And last but most certainly not least, you can show some support by spreading the word. Get on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever you use it to spread the word and tell people about us. Word of mouth is, of course, the absolute best. So, tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell a loved one, tell a random person on the street that they absolutely have to check out this crazy little podcast with Matt Shore, talking to reporters working in small towns and just getting their goofy stories and their weird experiences with the public. Now, this episode, we're going to be speaking with Leigh Landini Wright, an associate professor at Murray State University's Department of Journalism and Mass Communications. We're going to talk about the changes and the evolution of journalism and newspapers over this past year and previous years, because, journalism has been going through a bit of a transition, particularly in print. There are a lot of changes going on right now. Some of them are simple, some of them are rough. We'll do a good year in review of journalism for the year of 2019. All right, I'm speaking with Leigh Landini Wright, the associate professor for, I want to make sure I get this department right, journalism and mass communications at Murray State University. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool, fantastic. She's been teaching students about the wonderful world of journalism, the ins and outs, to try to prep them for it as best she can until they venture out into the unknown, we'll just say. So, Leigh, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I think this is going to be a fun podcast.
Yeah, I think so too. Most of the time I speak with people who are actually in the field, so this will be interesting talking to somebody who views it as an academic, kind of viewing maybe from the outside in the changes that have gone on over the years, because journalism certainly has changed, especially in print, and it's especially changed within the last 10 years. Would that be accurate?
That would be very accurate. I actually got out. I was at the Paducah Sun from 1993 until 2009. So it's hard to wrap my head around the fact I've been out for 10 years. But honestly, with teaching, I feel like I'm a better journalist now than I was when I was working full time. And I know that sounds really odd, but I feel like with teaching, I've had to learn a lot of these new tools, new trends, new technologies to better prepare these students for what they're going to go into. Because when I got out, Facebook was just a little blip. We were barely using Facebook. I think we just used it. I used it a lot during the ice storm to communicate with people, messaging about trying to figure out if things were open, trying to contact people, because, some people had internet, but remember, all the cell phone towers were pretty much down except for a few. Communication was an issue. And we were doing a little bit of video at the Sun before I left. Not a whole lot. We had an afternoon webcast thing called First Look that we did, where we previewed what was coming up in the paper. We'd have someone who interviewed, someone who's the host, someone who shot it. But that was like the early years. And nowadays, you look at a lot of newspapers, the big newspapers have multimedia staffs. They're doing all this stuff on social media. They're doing, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Some have tried Snapchat. I think some are trying this new one, TikTok, which I have not really played with that much. I downloaded it, and that's as far as I've gotten.
I didn't get much farther.
I don't see it, but if it's where the next generation is, that's how we have to reach them. We have to do whatever we can to keep telling these stories and to, keep people engaged. But all of this has changed, and especially the changes, I think, have been very fast in the past about probably 5-6 years. And so I'm constantly trying to learn new things so I can teach my students new things. Because they're going to be the future. And sometimes they'll go to some of these smaller papers, they come back and they're like, well, they're not doing what you taught us in class. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe they're not, but did you teach them something while you were there? Then also, like, sometimes on the community level, even small town newspapers, like here in Western Kentucky, the Crittenden Press, which is owned by Chris and Allison Evans, who are alumni of Murray State, they are doing a fantastic job on the social media and online game to try to engage the younger audiences. And so, yes, it's really changed a lot in 10 years. I realize that's a lot of answer for one question.
Well, there's a lot there. There's a whole lot to unpack with the changes because, like you said, in these past 5 years, they're coming hard and fast, and they're not subtle changes either. So many times they're massive changes. Like TikTok is a really good example here. If that does catch on, that's extremely different than like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. And I have not managed to wrap my head around how it. I kind of have a very vague idea of how it works, which clearly shows how old I am. But I've not quite managed to come up with a way that anyone could use it for marketing or even just spreading the word about something. So I guess time will tell on TikTok.
Yeah, and the same thing a few years ago. I remember everybody was like Snapchat, Snapchat, Snapchat. The kids were all on all my students were on Snapchat. And there were some media outlets that were using Snapchat, but then the kids even just got tired of Snapchat and seemed to have moved on to something else. And I mentioned this TikTok thing in class one day, and the kids literally just about rolled their eyes. Like, no. They were like, I don't see that as legitimate for news. So who knows? And the thing is, we're trying to, prepare them with the fundamentals of sound journalism, where they're going to be going into their communities to tell people stories, to be the watchdogs, to have a role in democracy, keep the community engaged in civic activities, all those types of things that have been the things that all of us have grown up on and have practiced for years. We're still trying to teach the fundamentals with good sound reporting skills, good sound writing skills, and then we're bringing in all the technology as well, and then trying to prepare them to be open to what's next. Because if you think about it, in probably both of our careers, a lot of things changed in both of our careers before we both changed and got out of the business.
Oh, definitely. It's hasn't quite been 10 years since I was there. I've kind of lost track, but when I stepped away from it, the two big things that they were making use of were Facebook and Twitter. Twitter, they were pushing really hard at the time. And now they actually make use of Instagram. But yeah, Twitter, man, I once set my phone to alert me with Twitter updates from the newspaper, just thinking this will help me stay informed. But oh man, it was going off like every 5 minutes and I had to turn it off.
Yeah, and that's one thing that my students and I have talked about is the push notifications. Once news organizations started doing the push notifications, it seems like it just got to be a lot. And especially in the news cycle we're in right now, some of my students have said, hey, I have turned off my push notifications because it's just too much. And whereas, push notifications really good for letting people know, hey, there's something coming up you need to read. I think it also has contributed to some of the news fatigue that we're seeing in society right now.
I can see that. Now, I will sing a little bit of praise to our local newspaper, the Leaf Chronicle. I use their app mostly to get my news from them right now. And I've actually left push notifications on with them because the most I get from them might be 2 a day. seems to be the average that I've noticed. Now, if they go up to like 3 or 5, then there's something big going on. But for the most part, it's only like, and I don't know how they gauge this stuff, because I was never in on that process, and I was long gone when it really caught on. But yeah, it doesn't wear me out yet. But I suppose that could change as time goes on.
Yeah, especially with the news right now. I have not been able to keep up with it some days. It's just so fast coming in.
Oh yeah, yeah. At all levels, it seems there's so much happening because we're so connected now.
Yeah, absolutely. My kids, my students, they live with the cell phone in front of them pretty much 24/7. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes to put it away and to get a little bit of break from everything. And that's what they've said is they're like, sometimes we just need a break from the news. You and I didn't, even if we were working at a paper, you still got a break when you went home.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and the push notifications, it is kind of interesting. I did a professional internship through one of our journalism education foundations a few years ago at the Stewart News in Stewart, Florida. And when they were talking about their push notifications that went out, they actually said not to send it out before a certain time of the day. And I can't remember exactly, but it was like quite early in the morning that they wouldn't send anything out before that time, and they wouldn't send anything out late at night. And so I thought that was interesting that, they are at least trying to be considerate of, people's sleeping schedules.
Yeah, that's definitely good. Reminds me of when I worked at the TV station for a little while. Anytime there was breaking weather, one of the hard rules was no matter how bad it is, do not interrupt Wheel of Fortune.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of like the changes and everything's been going on, is there anything as far as these changes that you've seen that does it give you any concern or any pause or whatever?
Yes, I think so. Like I mentioned, it is that constant churn that we're in now that I'm afraid that sometimes I think I'm worried that maybe it is sometimes just too much and people are turning us off, or that we are dwelling on so much like negative news. And so one thing that I've tried to bring in to some of my upper level classes this year has been something called solutions journalism, where you're trying to apply a rigorous examination to some of the solutions that can be offered to the problems in your community instead of just reporting on the problems. So the kids got excited about that. I think it's worth a lot more study on my part to do a better job of presenting it in the classroom. But a lot of it seemed like what we did when we were at community newspapers, that we were reporting on what was going on in our community and what groups were doing to try to help things that were happening in our community and not just dwelling on the negative. So I think that's something that's positive to keep an eye on. As far as the technology, I've noticed, of course, that, like right now we're on a podcast. Podcasts are huge. I saw a statistic that 121 million Americans now listen to spoken word audio, which is an increase of 16 million in the last 5 years. And I saw something somewhere, and I can't remember the source off the top of my head, that the New York Times, their fastest growing area was their audio with their podcast, The Daily. And I think we're going to continue to see that because the technology is getting better all the time. There are even like apps where you can record and edit a podcast. One of them is called Anchor. And so you can actually record and edit your podcast on your phone. And of course, if you're an audio purist, of course, you want to do more, something more like editing in Audition or Audacity or something with some more, more strict controls. But, it's just amazing. It's honestly amazing with all the technology and all that we can do now to tell these stories and to get the message out that we didn't have, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, the big thing I think now with just about everything is that the gatekeepers that we once had are all but gone today. Anybody can find some way to put their voice out there. Twitter, Facebook, a podcast, YouTube. There's just so many options right now.
Yeah. And that's been something I looked at a few years ago in a research study I did about social media and community newspapers with the gatekeeping theory. And When we went through and we were reporters, it was definitely, the newspaper or TV station was kind of controlling what the message was that went out, and we were the gatekeepers. And like you say, now anyone can put anything up, and so that's also given rise to a lot of the fakes that are out there, the misinformation that's getting spread. And so to combat that, I think we as educators, as well as we as journalists, we have to do a better job of, teaching people what's real and what's fake, teaching people how to do a better critical examination of what's online. It's like that ad. Remember the ad a few years ago? I saw it on Facebook. I saw it online, so it must be true. The French model. Do you remember that one?
I don't remember that, but I've heard that line.
Yeah. So I just think that all of us need to do a better job, since there is so much stuff out there. And I haven't delved too deeply into the whole thing with the deep fakes, but there's technology that allows you to fake video, to fake audio, and that's scary. That is super scary. I think, like, when you're a reporter, especially when you're a young cub reporter working a late night desk, if you had a phone call that came in that was like from somebody important in your community and it was faked, how scary could that be?
Yeah, very scary. My wife will constantly tell me something like some article she said she read, and it'll be really kind of outlandish, and I'll say, okay, well, who reported it? And she'll go and look, because it's inevitably she found it on Facebook. So then she'll show it to me, and I will look at it, and like, I can tell, okay, that's fairly reliable. Or all too often I'm just like, I don't know about this one. I've never heard of this group. I would view it with a little bit of a grain of salt until you see something similar from like the Associated Press. I still kind of operate on the belief, I guess, that was kind of instilled in me by my past editors, that essentially until the Associated Press reports it, it never happened.
Right. Which is interesting. I know you said you wanted to talk to me about the election last week here in Kentucky. I took my capstone students to the courthouse to gather election returns, to soak in that whole atmosphere, because for them it was the first time that they had been exposed to election coverage. And it was, of course, for you all who don't know, Kentucky, we had a very interesting gubernatorial race here between incumbent Republican Matt Bevin, who, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say it, but I think I'll just say it, has been a little Trumpish. And Democrat Andy Beshear, who's the current Attorney General, who is the son of the former governor, Steve Beshear. So I took my students and we gathered our results. Of course, as you remember, that night as it progressed, it was too close to call, and Matt Bevin ended up filing for a recanvass, which I think happens tomorrow on Thursday.
As we're recording this, yeah.
Yeah, as we're recording this, it's going to happen tomorrow on Thursday. And so as the night progressed, we started seeing, after we came back to our quote-unquote pop-up newsroom, which was our classroom here in my building, we were watching the returns on KET and listening to the commentary from Al Cross and Renee Shaw and others as they were talking, and various news organizations were calling it for Andy Beshear. It's a very close race, about 5,000 votes. Probably not going to change the results with a recanvass, but politics can be very strange these days. And so the kids had a long discussion, my student editor and my staff, we were having a long discussion about, okay, so if it's not official yet and it's still this close, how can we call it? Can we call it? And so we debated long and hard, do we call it? And when they saw that the Associated Press had not called it, they were like, you know what, we're going to follow the Associated Press's guidance on this, and we're going to say it's too close to call and leave it at that for tonight, and then come back and, work on it later on. Otherwise, I think we would have been here until 6 o'clock in the morning debating it.
That's one of those that, for a political nerd, is probably one of the greatest things ever to cover, but I remember when I covered elections, I would have hated for that to happen, because it meant I wasn't getting home until after midnight.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was regaling the kids with the tales of the 2000 election.
Oh, my. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I can't remember what time I crawled home after that one. I think it was pretty late. It was after deadline, I know.
That one must have been brutal.
Oh, yeah. It was great. Yeah. Election coverage is fun.
So did you, in keeping with what seems to be tradition, provide pizza for all your students?
Absolutely. I've told them for years about election night pizza that is the best pizza of the entire year, even when it's from the crappiest place on the planet.
That's right.
And I had meant to actually make them cupcakes or cookies, but it was a super busy day and I never made it home at all to do anything. But one of the young ladies, she's learning how to make pie. And so she rolled in with a homemade chocolate chess pie for us that night.
Oh, that would have been fantastic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That would have made all the work worth it.
Yeah. But what they did was they did a live blog on our capstone website. And so, they were reporting results pretty much in real time as they could. They saw that election night coverage really is a lot of hurry up and wait. It's like really busy, and then there's a lull. Really busy, then there's a lull. Really busy, then there's a lull. And then I let them practice interviewing skills with some of the precinct workers who came in to talk about the turnout, because we had a much better turnout than anyone really projected. Allison Lundergan Grimes, the Secretary of State, projected only a 31% turnout, but we ended up with 42% turnout.
I remember that. That was astronomical. I mean, it's sad that that's considered astronomical, but that's a huge bump in what they were looking for.
Right. Well, and especially because, Kentucky does off-year elections, so we're not tied into the presidential, or a lot of places didn't have any local races. Here in Callaway County, we didn't have anything else local. It was just the governor and the down ticket races, Secretary of State, Attorney General, all of those went red and the governor went blue. And so this has been a really fascinating election for my students to dig into, to do a little bit of analysis and like looking at what precincts went for Bevin, which ones went for Beshear. And then they've talked to some different people around the state. So it's been a great learning experience. And so that night, what we did was we covered it not only on a live blog for our website, because our website is it's the MKY Guide. It's mkyguide.mymurraystate.com. And we did a live blog, so they were reporting in real time, so they got that experience. Then I had them also reporting in real time on social media. So we were doing some Instagram Live, Facebook Live, Twitter, live tweeting the election. So that's where, for them, digital news and social media news is growing. And so I think that was a good experience for them to do it in real time. And then they were also watching the community journalist. They actually got to see my husband in action. And they were kind of marveling at like how fast he could get an interview in and just go right about his business, and watching some of the other reporters who came in. So it was a great night for them to do some real hands-on and experiential learning.
Very cool. Did any of the students mention any big takeaways that they had from that night?
Yes, I had a couple of them who, at least one, she said she had never really understood the political process until that night. And she said it just came to life for her. Because many of these students, they're 20, 21, 22. So they may have only voted in one election prior to this. And, they haven't been voting for very long. Even some of them may never have voted until now. It just depends on what cycle they're in. But yeah, they really enjoyed getting to see it up close and personal and seeing exactly how the process worked. They got to see like the the precinct workers bringing in those big tote bags with, the ballots in them. And so they were asking questions. So if nothing else, they got to see how the process is supposed to work. And, that's valuable. That's something they'll go and tell their grandkids about one day.
So nobody rethought their future career goals?
Well, I've got a couple of them who are political science majors or minors, and they were like, I think I want to go over to the political communication side. And then one of them was like, this is so much fun. She was like, I'd love to do it, but I don't like politics.
Politics, it can be frustrating and fascinating at the same time.
Yes. And I was actually a political science journalism double major and did an internship in politics one summer, came back and said, that's it, I'm going into journalism. And that was 20-something years ago, so I can't imagine what it's like now.
Yeah, me neither. Working for a small paper like I did, I had to cover politics, courtroom dramas, criminal ledgers, everything. So you got to be a jack of all trades. The smaller the paper is. So I was not the best political analyst, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's what I tell the students. That part of journalism and teaching has not changed. I have to tell them that they have to know a little bit about everything and be able to, adapt and do everything. And especially now, like we've mentioned, with all this new technology, we train them so that they can write for print, write for online, write for mobile social. They have to take a audio video class. They've got a TV broadcast class they take. So, we're trying to train them for all the different things that are out there so that they have a broad base for their career.
Yeah, and you, at this point, not even just with small newspapers, actually, I want to pull back my statement a little bit because even for a bigger newspaper, you really have to be a jack of all trades because with technology the way it is, there's a lot of downsizing going on because, I mean, the truth is it's just seen that you don't need a huge staff for all this stuff because you've got all this technology to help you do what once took probably 10 people to do, 1 or 2 people can do it now.
Right. And one thing with this technology is, you can record like an entire broadcast package on your phone and edit it straight from your phone. There are different apps that you can use. I teach, when I've taught, I've used iMovie, I've used Videolicious. Adobe just came out with a new product called Adobe Rush that's kind of like Adobe Premiere Lite. And when I've done some other, professional internships where I've embedded with a TV station, some of the, they're shooting on their phones for some things as well, especially for social media coverage. So yeah, the kids they've got so much more technology. So it has caused some shrinking in some of the newsrooms, which is concerning.
Yeah, that's been one of my concerns just from what I have seen is as a result of that, what I see in newsrooms when I get to them, I don't get to visit very much anymore, but I see less and less of what I would call like the old guard, like these grizzled, old, angry journalists who have been doing it for a few decades because those guys were still around when I got started, and I had a couple of them actually take me under their wing and show me the ropes effectively in different ways, that best ways to get the news, who you can trust in the community, who you can't, that sort of thing. And I don't see as many of those guys there anymore. And I just kind of worry a little bit because if they're younger and younger, there's nothing wrong, obviously, with being a young entry-level journalist. But if you don't stop learning once you graduate from college, you're constantly learning in that business. And if you don't have experienced teachers there, I don't know, that worries me a little bit.
Yeah, it worries me as well because I had some fantastic mentors at the Paducah Sun and some fantastic teachers, Carl Harrison, Bobby Faust, Bill Bartleman, Steve Vantrease, Joe Walker, some of those people who had been doing this business for decades before I got there. And sometimes, they'd sit down, you'd have a question, you go sit down, talk to them, and they would work through it with you, give you advice on who to talk to. So yeah, I'm worried because a lot of those people are now out of the business. They're either retired or doing something else in this industry. And so yeah, that is a concern when, because a lot of the people that we knew are obviously out of the business. And, my age group in the late 40s, some of them are beginning to have already left or are leaving for other industries, or they're being forced out by some of these companies that come in and downsize and take out the upper levels. Yeah. I found a statistic that said, and I hate this, but there are 37,900 people employed in newspapers. That's down 47% from 2004, down 15% from 2015. It's frightening.
Yeah, those are really just amazing statistics.
Yeah, I just happened to find that. And sometimes this can be a hard sell for students because they're like, the jobs aren't there. But then, the smaller papers like your Mayfield Messengers and Murray Ledgers and Paducah Suns and Owensboro Messenger Inquirer, Princeton Times Leader, some of these in my area, they're constantly emailing, texting, phone calls, asking us who we have because they have openings. That's encouraging, that there are going to be openings for student journalists to go out there.
Yeah, that's definitely good. And smaller papers, not that they're like, I don't, they're not getting rich by any stretch of the imagination, but and they're definitely feeling the crunch as well. But they seem to still be managing to feel the negative effects of all this a bit less than the bigger papers are. And I think some of that might be because they're uh, a community paper. The community really feels a sense of connection with that more so than than anyone's ever going to feel with like one of your bigger papers like the New York Times or the Washington Post.
Right, right. I was reading a study from the Pew Research Center that said 63% of Americans say that journalists are in touch with their local community. And I think a lot of that is because of the community journalism, the stuff that you and I both came out of, because these are the journalists who are in the community. They're going to church with, people in their community. They're running into them at the grocery, ball games. They're living life in their community, and they're not just swooping in for a big story and swooping out. They're actually actively engaged in their community. And I can say this because I've got a front row to it. Not only have I lived it, my husband is a reporter at the Murray Ledger and Times. And so we go somewhere and everybody knows who John Wright is. And they kind of look at me like, who are you? And I'm from Murray. That's the funny part. But yeah, everybody knows who he is because he's actively out there talking to people, doing stories. He loves what he does, and thank goodness he does because it's a lot of long hours. But everybody knows him, and he's invested in Murray, and so I think Murray has invested in him.
Yeah, that definitely makes a difference. I know when I worked at the Mayfield Messenger for almost 8 years, and the last few years, people, the movers and shakers of the town, they all recognized me from 10 feet away. It's like, oh, here comes Matt.
Yep. Oh yeah. I used to, when I was at the Sun, I could, anytime I went somewhere, it was like, oh yeah, I saw your picture in the paper, I read your article, or this or that. So
most of them were happy to see me. There were a couple here and there like, oh, shut up, don't say anything.
Yeah. Oh, we all hit that. Or it's like, oh no, they've shown up at this meeting again. Really?
Yeah.
People,
Well, as we start to wind down, one final question I wanted to ask. We talk about the changes. Looking back on 2019, is there any sort of evolution or change that you saw that really stands out?
That's a really interesting question. 2019 has been a fascinating year for media. I think it is a year that has shown that newspapers, TV, journalism is so vitally important with what's going on in Washington right now with the impeachment hearings. It's hard to pinpoint just one thing, but I think that people are realizing that we've got to keep journalism alive at whatever price. Like the Post says, it's on their website, democracy dies in darkness.
Right.
And I think that's really going to be vitally important as we go forward in the current political climate that we're in.
Yeah, without a doubt. We've certainly seen in the last few years a sort of, I don't know, a revelation or a reawakening or whatever among the population, maybe, that just how vital good journalism really is.
Right, right. And some schools, I've seen some studies or some surveys that have said that enrollment in journalism schools is up at some of the schools. And so that's encouraging because for several years, I would hear from parents about not wanting their kids to go into journalism. But then when I talk to students about all that they can do with journalism and how vitally important it is for our democracy, they get really excited. So I'm wondering if we're going to see like a bump like they saw after Watergate. I'm certainly hoping so because I love what I do, love journalism. Obviously I do, or else I wouldn't have lasted this long as a journalist and as a journalism educator because it's a lot of long hours on both ends.
Yeah, I'll bet. As this last election proved.
Exactly, but that was so much fun. It was so much fun to get to see the kids and their reactions and getting to see some light bulbs coming on, and then they're still talking about the election, and it's been a week.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they've got a follow-up story coming out tomorrow.
All right, well, great. We've covered a lot of ground here. I think this is a good place to cut things off, I suppose. Do you have anything else specifically about your career that you want to make sure and mention before we wrap things up?
I think we're good.
All right, well, thanks very much. Thanks once again for taking the time to speak with me and being on my humble little podcast.
Okay, so 2019 has been a rather eventful year. I'm sure that's the understatement of the millennium, but that's simply the case. And it's not over yet. A lot of time left in this year for some more crazy and big things to happen. For example, the interview that we conducted that during a time when the governor's race of Kentucky was actually still a little bit of a toss-up, even though the results had come in and it was pretty clear that the governor-elect Andy Beshear had beaten the incumbent governor, Matt Bevin. People still wondered if Matt Bevin would ever really concede. He didn't concede the night of the election, and he kept holding out. And ultimately, he did concede, but not without throwing a little bit of shade on the whole thing by calling the results into question. So, modern-day politics for you. Now, I did mention that I had some major announcements to come at the end of this episode. So, since you have been so patient, here they are. When I said that this was the final episode, I was teasing, but not totally. There are some things on this episode that we're not going to see again. For instance, the humble little introduction song that we've had on this. That was just a sort of generic, copyright-free song that I found, and people said anybody could use it. And it's served us well. It's been a nice little intro to give us something to open the show up with, but I want this show to have its own personal flavor, its own official theme song. So, starting with our next episode, in 2020, Tales from a Small Town Journalist will have its own official, professionally produced introduction and its own official theme song. So, I'm pretty excited for that. Never had a show that had its own theme song, so that's exciting, I think. Hopefully you guys find that a little bit exciting as well. If you follow me on social media, be sure to keep an eye out because I will be posting news and updates and teasers and trailers and all kinds of great stuff to let you guys know about those songs. Heck, who knows, I'll probably even just post the songs at some point so that you guys get a taste for what the new show is going to be like next month. So speaking of which, if you do want to follow this show, there are two great ways you can do so. It has its own official website, smalltownjournalisttales.blogspot.com, and it has its own Twitter site now. It's at Journalist Tales. Feel free to follow there, and you'll get each episode as it comes up, not to mention news and updates as they come about. And also, if you would like to follow me on social media or online, here are some ways to do so. You can follow me on my website at mattshore.net. You can also follow me on Twitter at @TheMattShore. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram at The Shore. Not to mention the fact that we do have a Facebook page. It is facebook.com/Shore Manor, since this is a Shore Manor production. Be sure to follow along there. If you're a Facebook user, you can see all kinds of updates about this show, my other projects, not to mention cool, spooky content as it comes available. And as we wind down this episode, the last one of 2019, I do want to make sure and mention thank you for following us throughout the year, listening to each and every episode. I definitely appreciate it. It's been a really cool year putting this thing out there and getting to talk with a bunch of other journalists. We'll definitely plan on keep doing it. I hope I can do it for a very long time. I want to make sure and promote all of the local newspapers in any area that you might be at. The most important source of news you are ever going to have will be from your local newspaper. I'll admit I'm a little biased in that, but I really do believe that. So anytime you can, support your local newspaper, and if you happen to come across a journalist in your area, let them know they do a good job. They don't get enough thanks, believe me. They can definitely use a little bit of appreciation. So, as we wind down, in closing, I will say one last time for the year of 2019, keep reading and keep listening. Thanks.